Deep down, behind the dark, gothic, and bizarre stories we explore here, I'm really just a history nerd at heart. A history nerd with a macabre taste, but a history nerd nonetheless. I've had brief conversations with the channel Call of the Dark, as well as with Corrine over at Our Ghost Reel, and I've expressed my jealousy at the long, rich history they have over in the UK. I can think I'm researching old legends from the 1800s, sometimes even the 1700s. Then all of a sudden, they are showcasing sites from the 1500s and even before. America does have its ancient sites, though, when we dig back into native legends and oral histories. Sacred sites, some of which still offer a glimpse of their former glory. A few of these sites, though, carry their own controversies. One such site was brought to my attention by subscriber and author Mecca Hannah. It's called Fort Mountain, named for the ruins of an old stone fort or wall. The majority of historians date the structure to the early Cherokee tribes, and some historians date it back to the Muskogee tribe, who inhabited North Georgia before being driven out by the Cherokee. A small few attribute the structure as being built by the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto, although most historians disagree with this since de Soto was only in the area for about 2 weeks. Needless to say, no one really knows for sure. There was a lot of speculation in the history community, anything from a defensive structure, a religious site, or even a honeymoon-type location for native newlyweds. I will give respect where respect is due, though. Historians all agree that these are just speculations. Suspiciously missing from all of the historic speculations and theories, though, is what the natives say is the source of the structure. The native peoples of the area of North Georgia, as well as those that came before them, all have tales of the fort. To be more specific, they have tales of the fort already being there, already existing, before the natives came to the region. According to the natives, the stone fort was built by a race of beings that history rarely looks into, but a race that is commonly referred to within the native cultures. A race of subterranean beings that the natives called the Moon-Eyed People. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture. Some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. Just east of Chatsworth, Georgia, sits Fort Mountain, a mountain near the southern end of the Appalachian mountain range. The mountain itself gets its name from the stone ruins near its peak, a pile of stones reminiscent of a wall, following the contours of the mountain. The University of Georgia gives the wall's length at 928 feet, while the Georgia Department of Natural Resources gives its length at 855 feet. The site sits within the Chattahoochee National Forest, and the Park Service itself lists the origins of the structure as unknown. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources states that, quote, "The mysterious 855-foot wall is thought to have been built by early Indians as fortification against more hostile Indians or for ancient ceremonies." End quote. As early as 1879, people speculated that the structure was the remains of a fort constructed by Hernando de Soto. This theory was disputed as early as 1917, though, as historians point out that de Soto was in the area for less than 2 weeks. Some modern tourist sites say that the site was constructed by native people around 500 AD for religious purposes, although actual archaeological reports concluded only that the structure, quote, represents a prehistoric aboriginal construction whose precise age and nature cannot yet be safely hazarded until the whole problem, of which this is a representative, has been more fully investigated. End quote. That now is unlikely to happen since the site resides within a national park, and the site itself was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1977. As with anything else that leaves more questions than answers, a fair number of legends have sprung up concerning Fort Mountain. One of the most prevalent legends revolves around the Welsh explorer Prince Madoc, arriving to North America in the 1100s. According to folklore, Madoc was a young prince from Wales that sailed to the Americas in 1170, over 300 years before Christopher Columbus. The stories have Madoc taken to the seas as an explorer to escape the internal violence that had been rising in the country of Wales. Madoc's travels eventually found him in a land that would later become North America, where he and his travel companions would intermarry with the local natives. This left a descendant line of, quote, Welsh Indians that were credited with building a number of landmarks throughout the eastern United States, all the way to the Midwest. The earliest written accounts of Madoc and his travels dates to between 1250 and 1255, but the stories were really boosted to relevance in the Elizabethan era in an effort to boost England's claim to the New World over that of Spain's. In accounts written in the 1500s, Prince Madoc had discovered a land on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, then returned to his homeland of Wales. He then set sail again with 100 men, women, and children to establish a new colony. Madoc and a few men later returned to Wales again, but only briefly, before leaving for the New World again, this time with 120 men, women, and children on 11 different ships, sailing west for the final time. He would never return to Wales. There are several historical examples to support the theory of the, quote, Welsh Indians. On November 26, 1608, a letter was written from Peter Wynne to John Egerton, the first Earl of Bridgewater. Wynne was part of an exploration party in what is today known as the state of Virginia. In that area, the party encountered the Monacan tribe. In his letter, Wynne, a native Welsh speaker, informed Egerton that the Monacan language strongly resembled Welsh, and that Wynne was able to recognize several words. Wynne went on to successfully work as an interpreter between the explorers and the native tribe. In 1669, Reverend Morgan Jones reported being captured by natives in the region that would later be known as North Carolina. According to Jones, his life was spared after the tribe heard him speaking Welsh, a language that the tribe understood. Jones went on to live with the tribe for several months before being allowed to return to the British colonies, where he documented his accounts in 1686. On January 22, 1804, U.S. President Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to explorer Meriwether Lewis that he had heard accounts of the, quote, Welsh Indians in the Missouri River area, and asked Lewis to find evidence of the descendants of Prince Madoc, but their exploration turned up no evidence. In 1810, Tennessee Governor John Sevier documented a conversation he had with a Cherokee chief concerning structures built along the Alabama River. According to Sevier, the Cherokee chief said that they were forts built by a race of white men called Welsh. They were built as fortifications against the Cherokee, but the Cherokee were eventually successful in driving out the Welsh tribes from the area. Sevier also told of several skeletons in the same area, wearing brass armor with the Welsh coat of arms. According to Sevier, and the information he received from the Cherokee in Tennessee, the Welsh were the first people in the northern regions of Alabama. In 1824, Thomas Hyde told the editor of the publication The American Pioneer that 6 skeletons were discovered along the Ohio River with breastplates bearing the Welsh coat of arms. The Welsh narrative was revived yet again in the 1840s and 1850s, this time amongst Midwestern tribes. Then, in 1878, a Welsh-American Mormon missionary writes that upon visiting the Zuni tribe in 1878, he discovered many Welsh words in their language. He wrote that according to the Zuni, they were the descendants of the Cambaraga, what they describe as white men who had come by sea 300 years before the Spanish. There are many sites said to be attributed to the Welsh. Tradition has a site called the Devil's Backbone at Rose Island, around 14 miles upstream from Louisville, Kentucky. Tradition says the site was once home to a colony of Welsh-speaking natives. Of course, there's the site of Fort Mountain, which we began this presentation with. There is also a set of caves in northern Alabama, in DeKalb County, a set of caves that were excavated, not naturally occurring, within DeSoto State Park. These set of caves, known as the Welsh Caves, are located about 325 feet above the Little River, carved into the face of a cliff. There are 5 caves, side by side, with 3 of them interlocking by carved-out chambers deeper within. Park officials state that the caves were once protected by 2 stone walls, built in a semicircle around the entrance. Historians do not believe that the natives built this cave structure, as they were not familiar with excavation at the time. It's believed that it was a defensive structure, as with its elevation, it was in a position that 20 men could fend off a group of 1,000 men easily. Timbers within the cave system shows evidence of being cut by axe, and dating on the timbers show that the age is being 300 years before DeSoto made it to the region. What's been largely ignored in all of these accounts and possible tie-ins by historians, though, is what the actual natives claim, especially the Appalachian regions of the northern Alabama and Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. According to the natives in those areas, these sites were built by a race of beings called the Moon-Eyed People. The Cherokee described the Moon-Eyed People as short, bearded, white-skinned people. The name Moon-Eyed People came from the fact that these people's eyes were extremely pale, and although this caused them to see poorly during the day, the Moon-Eyed People excelled in seeing in the dark. Because of this, the Cherokee people tell stories of the Moon-Eyed People being largely nocturnal and living underground during the day. The Cherokee all claim that the Moon-Eyed people existed in the southern Appalachian regions well before the Cherokee migrated to the area. The Muskogee tribe has tales of the Moon-Eyed people related to the site of Fort Mountain as well. This region was well populated by the Muskogees before the Cherokee drove them from the hills. With the Muskogee arriving to the region before the Cherokee, even they have tales of the Moon-Eyed people being there when they arrived. The obvious descriptions of the Moon-Eyed people having white skin, white-colored eyes, and beards is why most people attribute them to the stories of the early Welsh explorers. But then again, with those tie-ins, they never take into account the descriptions of them being short-statured, living underground, or even being unable to see during the day. As far as the, quote, short stature, from what I could find, the average height of the Welsh in those days was around 5 foot 7 inches, where the average height of the Cherokee during the same time frame was 5 foot 8 inches. Sure, on average, the Welsh would have been 1 inch shorter, but is that enough to have the entire race described as little people? There is evidence of the Welsh living underground in caves, but that would have been in the Roman era, some 700 years before the time of Prince Madoc. By then, they would have been living in homes constructed of timber and thatch, and it would make sense that any Welsh explorers making it to America in the 1100s would have constructed similar dwellings, because that's what they knew. And I'm pretty sure that British societies in the 1100s weren't nocturnal. Both the Cherokee and the Muskogee tribes are clear in their descriptions, both oral histories lining up with each other. The Cherokee are said to have driven out the Moon-Eyed people, forcing them south and west from the Appalachian Hills. Similarly, the Muskogee claim to have driven out the Moon-Eyed people even further west and south from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains to lower Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, as well as to the west of their territories. Hints as to who these people were from the original oral histories are few and far between. Outside of their physical descriptions, all we really know is that they were an enemy of both the Cherokee and Muskogee people. Interesting, since the Cherokee and Muskogee were known to be enemies of each other as well. It isn't laid out as to why the Moon-Eyed people and the later arriving natives became enemies, but the construction of such elaborate defensive structures lead me to believe that the Moon-Eyed people expected some sort of attack for some time. Or perhaps there was an older enemy that history and tradition has forgotten. According to one Cherokee legend, the wall that remains at Fort Mountain is all that remains of a war between the Moon-Eyed people and the neighboring Muskogee Nation, the Muskogee having won the war and driven the surviving Moon-Eyed people further south. The Cherokee describe exploring the aftermath of the war, and have stories of the site on Fort Mountain containing a temple within the walls, and inside the temple was a great stone snake with ruby eyes. In another Cherokee legend, it was the Cherokee themselves that defeated the Moon-Eyed people, but this was at the Battle of Hiwassee, near Murphy, North Carolina. We've briefly touched on this battle in the past while exploring the legends of the Nunnehi, a supernatural race of beings in Cherokee folklore, very much akin to the Celtic belief in the Fae. In that legend, the Nunnehi assisted the Cherokee in defeating a neighboring tribe. So, either these stories are conflated, or it took a coordinated effort between the Cherokee and the Nunnehi to beat the Moon-Eyed people. It's interesting to see the Nunnehi's involvement here, and in keeping with that previous video's comparison of the Nunnehi with the Fae, I feel I'd be doing you a disservice if I did not point out that the Fae had a natural enemy as well. The Fomorians, a supernatural race of beings originally said to have come from underneath the earth. While the Fae were said to have lived in harmony with nature, the Fomorians were said to represent the wild and destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. Conflicts between the Fae and the Fomorians were regular, and echoes those wars in other cultures, such as the battles between the Greek Titans and the Olympians, or the Aesir and Vanir of Norse culture. The earliest known accounts of the Fomorians describe them as monstrous beings that dwell beneath the worlds of men. Although they were described as monsters, often missing limbs or having a single eye at times, there is no blanket description of the race as a whole. It's said that occasionally there was an intermarriage between the Fomorians and the Fae, and those offspring were always described as darkly beautiful. Alright, rein it in, Dixie. You're bouncing around all over the place. Those are just some similarities that jump out at me, and I'm pretty sure those are the reasons that Mekahana requested this presentation in the first place. I can hear the comment section already though. Actually, Dixie, the Cherokee people have been in the Appalachian region since the 8000s BC. Okay, what's your point? I didn't give a timeline. That was the, quote, Welsh Indian theory that did that. What if they both happened? You know, two things can be true at the same time, right? As far as the Welsh making it to America in the 1100s, we're gonna have people say that it's not possible with the boats at that time, especially with the amount of travelers Prince Madoc is said to have brought on his 2 trips. Get out of here with that. So they couldn't have sailed across the Atlantic, but simply walking here from Asia thousands of years earlier is still on the table? For someone like me, at the core, there are 2 possibilities. Either the natives were telling the truth, or they weren't. Argue me if you want, but it's really as simple as that. Sure, ancient people could have misunderstood things, conflated things, whatever. But I still entertain what they say. I don't cast it away altogether. There's none of that, quote, European superiority here. If I'm going to believe in ghosts, creatures, and the like, then I have to approach the idea of the Moon-Eyed people with an open mind. Some say I have 2 ways of looking at things, with a supernatural mindset and a biblical mindset. Me? I say they're one and the same. I believe water was turned to wine. Demons were cast out. Jesus walked on water and rose from the dead. Why would I laugh off the idea of a race of beings that lived beneath the ground in Appalachia? I don't think the Moon-Eyed people were Fomorians, though. I feel like if they were borderline monsters, the Cherokee and Muskogee people would have told us that. Now, a possible surviving lineage of Fae and Fomorian offspring is fully on the table for me, especially surviving on in Appalachia for a while, having been exiled from their original homelands. Fae breeding with Fomorians, producing darkly beautiful offspring. offspring that went on to captivate humanity and present themselves, whether intentionally or not, as supernatural. I'm down with that. It wouldn't be the first time I've heard something similar. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of man and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. But that's a whole nother presentation.